Hey, everyone. Welcome to Unique Ways with Thomas Gerard, an audio podcast. We've got an awesome guest today who has a 25-year track record developing new customer experiences for global retail brands. He's led research and design projects for brands like Nike, Starbucks, and Ford. Please join me in welcoming Paul Conder. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
You ready for 20 questions?
Let's do it.
Question one, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What do you do?
As you said, my name is Paul Conder. I lead the experience design team here at Callison RTKL. I'm based here in New York. We are a global architecture and design practice. We have several different practices within that, and one of them is retail, another is hospitality, and I work primarily in those two, although I'm working in other fields as well. For example, healthcare, I've done a few projects in that. I'm from Ottawa originally. I moved to Vancouver kind of like everybody else did when I graduated in the early 90s. I started off in industrial design, and that gradually morphed its way into experience design and innovation consulting as my career progressed. And I moved to New York in 2016 to take on my current role here at CRTKL. I get a lot of questions around what experience design is, and part of the question is, what do I do? So experience design, the easy way to think of it is helping really big, complex organizations like a huge retailer with lots of different stores, or a healthcare provider, or even some bigger clients like at the scale of a city or a government, deliver really great experiences for the users and their customers and their staff. And those experiences help tell different stories about what those brands are about. So you mentioned Starbucks. I mean, for them, their brand is all about convenience and value. So you have to design experiences to make that work within the context of experience of convenience and value. Or a luxury brand might be more interested in something that's very high touch and personalized, and maybe has some spectacle to it, right? And feels, really sort of intimate with the customer. And so when we're working with a brand, we're thinking about how to articulate their story through these experiences that we're creating. And where the rubber hits the road really is that the experiences that people have now with brands aren't just living in one channel. And what I mean by that is the idea that if you're shopping now, you've probably already educated yourself about the product that you're interested in online. You might have a phone that is running, all sorts of different websites or apps or whatever that are actually giving you comparative pricing, or you're reading reviews on the products that you're looking at. So shopping is no longer something that lives within just the store. It's something that lives within a much larger ecosystem of touch points that gets into services and digital touch points, things like that. My job is to coordinate all that. So we play in this space where we tackle these sort of big problems, focusing on the user's needs first. It's not really just about the technology. It's a lot more to do with sort of empathizing with the customer, understanding what their needs are, and designing experience for them across all these channels at once. And it could be about how do you create a really seamless retail experience that's super convenient, like Amazon, but also has the same quality of someplace like a Nordstrom. Or it could be about creating an urban transit solution that incentivizes people to use way less carbon, but you still get to work on time. I mean, I would love to redesign the DMV because that's a great combination of service and physical and digital channels all colliding in one place, to be able to create a sort of experience, an end-to-end sort of sequence of things that you do to connect with the place.
Awesome. Just a note for our audience, Paul and I met something like 20 years ago. I was a teenager in art school. It's super interesting to be on this side of the table. Number two is, what's a key piece of knowledge that makes you different?
Well, when we met, I was teaching industrial design, and that's where I got my start. And I realized roughly around that time, roughly around 20 years ago, that the reason that brands fail or businesses fail usually has very little to do with whether or not the product works. We've gotten pretty good at making the product work. And the challenge usually is whether or not you have a good enough understanding of the people that are using it. And so I like to think that that's one of the things that I've really developed over the last few years, is being able to have sort of an empathy with the humans in the equation, and understanding what their needs are, and understanding how people interact in spaces and with digital products and things. But then beyond that, seeing design has really shifted a lot from being the sort of, lone genius hunched over a drafting table to being a facilitator of a much larger conversation. You can't do this kind of work if you're not including a lot of different points of view and really listening to people, and bringing lots of, sort of diversity of point of view around the table to be able to figure out, crack the solution. And so I think my process is a little bit different than a lot of other designers. Not all. I'm not unique in this. There's others that work this way too, but it's something that I've really pushed hard on in the last 20 years. And then also, I'm fluent across several different production channels. Normally, when you go to architecture school, you learn about construction, and when you go to industrial design school, you learn about manufacturing. You go to digital design school, you learn about coding and wireframes and prototypes and things. And I think I've got a wide enough purview across all of those that I'm able to integrate them at the top level, and then work with people who are specialists to be able to make the experience real in the real world. So tying all that together is sort of my top line, sort of the thing that I probably do a little bit differently than other people.
That's great. It's coming up more and more, this idea from 20 years ago of the ivory tower kind of designer that knows all versus what we're at today, which is very collaborative and kind of full of mistakes that we kind of work through. It seems like you're really embracing this kind of new way of design.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I think that's where it's gone, and I think that's the way younger designers are working. I think there's a generational difference there because we were taught differently. I think they're teaching design in school this way now, and we're seeing new graduates come in with a much more collaborative kind of open approach, as opposed to being the person that has to have all the ideas. I usually come into it saying, I'm not going to come up with the big ideas in this. This is going to come out of the group. But I can facilitate the conversation and get people talking, which is more where my skill set lies.
Awesome. Number 3 is why this, of all things, why do you do what you do?
I've always seen this as an intersection of 3 things, and it's super simple. One is that it's something I love to do. I really enjoy this process, and I enjoy it more and more as I get further into it. And I learn more and I get better at it. So it's definitely something I love to do. It's something that I think I'm fairly good at. I think that I've got to a point now where I can deliver a very consistent product, and I've always been pretty good in that space. And I sort of just have a propensity to be able to do this. And then it's something that has a fair amount of value for other people. So it's something that I can charge for. And there's all sorts of things that I really like and that I'm not bad at, but I might not be able to make money at it. And this is something where if you get this right, the value to the client is really huge. I mean, we can unlock all sorts of revenue. We can connect brands with new customers. We can open up new acquisition channels. We can keep people more loyal. And we can do it all very transparently, which is great because we get to work with some fairly big brands, and with them as partners, it's amazing the sort of the upside that you can create. So 3 things there. So good at it, love to do it, and there's value in it. And I'm super lucky in that when I think about it. When I put that there, when I just said that, I'm like, how lucky am I that I get to have that? I know it's actually quite rare. So
Well, what struck me there was the word facilitator. I know what it's like to be an educator and play that facilitator role, but it's super interesting to hear about that in practice.
yeah, it's actually a lot more like design actually looks a lot more like teaching. I mean, when we met, I was teaching, and I gradually my career has moved more and more to something that looks like not teaching like broadcasting in a lecture hall or something, but teaching like more like you would do it in graduate school, where you're working with the students, and learning is really 2 ways. I mean, I picked up so much from my students when I was working at the school, and I still learn tons from everybody around the table here. And so I think that 2-way dialogue is really really important. It's part of why I like this so much, and part of sort of what keeps you. I know this is a question that might be coming up a bit later, but it's part of what keeps you fresh.
Yeah, we have Debbie Millman booked for tomorrow, who's the chair at School of Visual Arts in the Master of Branding program. I'm super interested to hear her views on all of this.
I think
Uh,
that's going to be a great call. That sounds great.
Awesome. Number four, what does your future look like?
Um, I'm always somebody who's sort of trying to plot that out a little bit. I sat in on a lecture by a couple of futurists, and one of them said that super useful exercise to understand your intentions for the future, but you're probably going to be totally wrong about predicting it. So I'm really happy with it, just work wise. I'm really happy with the progress that we've made here in building out our team, and the progress that we've had is sort of radiating our firm and trying to get to scale, which has been great. We've had a really good ride doing that, especially over the last year or two. And there's a lot of opportunities for us that haven't realized themselves yet, and they're right there. And so I think it's going to be a really exciting time because we're at the point now where we've got a really great team established, and we're able to really move forward very quickly. And that's been great. The whole transition over to working here has been really good to me as far as creating an environment for growth, which has been great. And then scaling up globally is going to be our focus. I already spent a fair amount of time on airplanes. There might be a little bit more of that. But we really sort of hit our stride. And also I'm really loving New York. So I see myself here as a base going forward. I really enjoy that part of it. And so I want to hang on to that bit.
Nice. And number five, and I guess, in terms of the geographic, let's talk about location. How does the notion of place play into what you do?
There's a lot of ways to sort of think about that question. Just on the really pragmatic one, I mean, I moved to New York after 5 years of extremely intensive travel for work. I was doing a lot of consulting, and I was out usually 50 weeks a year, and that gets really heavy. And being in a mega city like this that's so dense and has so much going on in it, I haven't had to travel quite like that. I still travel a fair bit, but not like that. And so when I came to New York, I'm probably the only person whose blood pressure actually went down in that process because I had a I had the ability to do a lot more work near here. And there's something great about the idea of putting yourself in a place where the opportunity is, as opposed to having to reach for it every week. So that part of it's been good. But when I think about your question in another way, place informs the work that we do because we are part of an architecture and interior design firm. And part of what we do is think about how we localize the experience based on culture, based on design, aesthetics, local needs, climate, all sorts of things. And so when we're working with these larger brands, things change from place to place quite a bit. And we generally find that the brands that have figured out how to localize their offering and make it more relevant at a local level tend to succeed a little better. A great example of that, and we didn't work on this project, but we worked a fair amount with Nike, but they did a project in Los Angeles where they only stock the store with stuff that's been ordered within a 10-mile radius. So the store just responds to the e-commerce data that's coming from around it. That's a really good example. Or Nordstrom putting in their local services where, in large cities, they're able to do omni-channel fulfillment and, have a really localized offering, but they don't have the whole store there. They just have the services, and they have the drop off, and they have the delivery, and they have the returns. That kind of thing, getting things closer to people, I think is a pretty big trend in the industries that I work in.
Nice. Number six, if you had to start from scratch, what advice would you give your former younger self?
I sort of sweated over this one. I was sort of thinking about what I would say to myself. I don't think about this a lot, but it came down to me for sort of trusting your gut a little better. There were a lot of times, and I've worked in several different sort of organizations and kind of fields, in teaching and manufacturing and things like this until I got into the consulting thing. And all the way through it, I think I'd go back and I tell myself to trust my gut a little bit better. There were a lot of times where my senses were kind of telling me something, and I wasn't really able to put my finger on it, and I didn't listen to myself as well as I could have, and a lot of the time I turned out to be right. It's not that I would reduce the risks that I took. It's like I'd probably actually take a few more. Um, but it's more in how I would handle those risks in the moment. I think I would probably, my gut reaction is was better than I gave myself credit, I think. And I'd probably also tell myself that I had a bit more power to make changes than I thought I did at the time. When you're starting out, you sort of think that you're kind of moving with the currents because there's economic forces, and wherever you are, where you're living, whatever the opportunities are presented to you, you respond to them. And I think, and maybe younger people now are a bit smarter about this, but I think saying, you know what, I have the power to change this, at least within my own sphere, and really going with that, I think is, I was pretty good in that respect, but I think I'd want to bolster my strength in that a little bit better.
Nice. What's a day in your life like?
Well, pretty well every day. I find myself doing some kind of a charrette or a workshop where I've got a group of people and we've got a whiteboard or sticky notes or prototypes or whatever we're doing, and we try things out, and we throw our opinions around the table, and it's a very flat, non-hierarchical kind of conversation. So that's the sort of conversation that I tend to facilitate, and that's kind of where the design comes from. That's probably my favorite thing to do in the workday. The rest of the time, I'm either doing creative direction, which is fun too, or you're working more one-on-one and sort of making sure that you've got the quality you're looking for and that things are staying on track. And then I do a fair amount of meeting clients and doing business development work, which I really enjoy that as well. I tend to travel a fair bit too now that COVID's sort of waning off. And I look back on it and I think about the intensity that people threw at work in design school, is sort of the idea that, oh, excuse me, phone call, I just get rid of that. The intensity that people put into work at design school, and you asked what I would tell myself earlier. It's like, you know what, as you get further into this, you enjoy it more. And it's not as heavy a lift as you get better at it. And so young designers, like people come out of school and they sort of have these expectations they're going to throw 100 hours a week at something, and it's not like that in the working world. I mean, companies can't operate that way, first of all, but it's also it's something where it's way more collaborative. You've got people that you can ask for advice quicker. You've got way more collaborative creative sessions. You've got opportunities to be able to grow in different ways that suit your working style and your preferences and your skills and your interests. And a good company is able to offer you all that, and that's the kind of place I feel like I'm in right now. And I just sort of would go back to school and say, you know what, it's actually really great out here. It's not the kind of thing that where it's the young student sort of comes out and thinks that they're dealing with kind of insurmountable workloads and a lack of opportunity. It's just the opposite.
Yeah, I'm reminded of when I was a kid slash designer, and my designer family friend pulled me over and said, it gets easier.
Yeah.
Number 8. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does. And, I'm not sure where that comes from in design school, but it's something that maybe it's changing. I hope that's changing.
Yeah. No, sorry. Number 8, lifelong learning is a popular topic these days. How do you stay up to date?
For me, the best way to stay up to date is to build a network within the community of people and do it through conversations and just being around people that I think are really smart, and also getting out of my own head and not just talking to designers. Designers are great, and there's lots of inspiration there, but what else you got? A lot of the big things that have pushed on design have come from outside of the field. And I think the design fields can be a little bit insular. So, building that community outside, I think is really important. And that's coming back online a lot more now. Now that COVID sort of passed off. Like, for example, a colleague of mine and I just visited a digital design lab at Columbia, and uncovered all sorts of areas where there could be potential collaboration, and areas that we were learning things from them, about different things that they were working on, and areas with all sorts of, sort of new ideas bubbling up, and it was really inspiring. And also, something that I think benefited everybody there. I'd much rather do that than try to get to a place like that by reading about it.
Mm.
Yeah.
I feel like you touched on nine a bit, but what tools do you use? Are you a digital nomad?
Ah, I can be. I travel very, very light. I'm able to do just about anything remotely if I want to. And I did quite a bit of that during COVID. I mean, I moved to San Diego for 6 months for a project there.
Mm.
And normally I'd be flying back and forth, but that just wasn't feasible with COVID. And so my wife and I just, picked up shop and moved out there, and she could work remotely. So it was great. And we did that in a few other locations too, in Europe and things. And that was fantastic. But for me, there's no replacement for face-to-face interaction when it comes to intensively trying to design an experience.
Mm.
Like having the right people in the room, and I think you kind of have to be in the room. I haven't like, you can do it on Zoom,
Mm.
and it's not bad,
Mm.
but it's just not the same.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're getting back to those things. Now, whether I'm the nomad or whether the clients are coming to us or however that's working out, I can't define it, but I'm not somebody who wants to sit on a teleconference for 8 or 9 hours a day and say that that's my job. I'd go crazy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, halfway here, number 10. How do you
Mhm.
deal with work-life balance?
Uh, like I said, I mean, our firm is pretty good that way, and as are most of our competitors, and so I don't feel like I can't take time when I need it, or that I'm on call like 247 or anything like that. So I can get the balance that I need. Um, and I personally, I always want to make time, to be able to spend with my wife, to be able to be at home, but then also be able to get away. We love to travel. And just, have a little bit of fun, smell the roses, that kind of thing. I don't, but I don't think I don't think that's a barrier. I've never really had a problem with work-life balance. I might work, I'm definitely somebody that will work 40 hours a week and plus like easily up that, and be very happy doing it. That's not the issue. It's just I've never really felt out of balance in that space.
11 is if you weren't doing what you do now, what would you be doing?
Um, I I think I would have taken a stab at producing music. I love working with a band in a studio, not necessarily as an instrumentalist, but I can do that. But just bringing out the sound of a band and what makes them and a song kind of special. I mean, I'm not really an expert in that space. I mean, I'm not Brian Eno or anything, but um, that's probably where I've put myself. If I was starting over at 21 and there was a fork in the path, I seriously considered it, and then I wound up in design,
Mm.
um, which was, similarly felt like it was a good creative kind of space. I could have seen making that other choice. I could have seen doing it.
12, what would you not like to do in terms of your career?
Worst job for me would probably be accountant.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, I can do it. I can actually do it, and I can actually sort of enjoy it for a little while. But I mean, I don't connect with that particularly well as a lifelong task or anything like that. That sort of space doesn't really do much for me.
What's your favorite word, quote, or sentence?
I thought about this. My favorite word is blimp,
Mm.
just because I like the way it sounds. Blimp. Um, if I was going to pick a favorite quote, um, I would, and we're going to keep it in design. I would probably say that it had something to do with um, Bill Buxton when he
Mm.
was speaking about the idea of a Renaissance team. Bruce Mao speaks about this one a fair bit too,
Mm.
where the problems of the present day are too complex for a Renaissance man or Renaissance person to figure out, and you need a group of people with diverse talents, skill sets, and expertise to be able to work together in a collaborative environment to be able to crack the solutions that we need for contemporary problems. And so instead of a Renaissance man, you have a Renaissance team. And I love that idea. And the designer's role in that is to facilitate that conversation.
I'm glad you brought up Bruce Mao. A previous guest, Dr. Marco Bevelo, worked in an office right beside Bruce Mao's office in Europe for a time, and kind of talks about it a lot. Number 14 is, what's your least favorite word, quote, or sentence?
Whenever I hear someone say, I'm going to play devil's advocate,
Hmm.
I hate that. Like, who let the devil's lawyer in the room kind of. Whenever you hear that, it easily turns into a conversation killer. Yeah, I think that's probably my pet peeve.
15, if you had to pick one word to describe yourself, what would you choose?
Lucky.
What
Very,
keep,
very lucky to be so fortunate to have to be able to do what I do and love it so much and have everything else around me, my family, my health. It's I feel very, very blessed, fortunate. So let's call it lucky.
what keeps you up at night?
I sleep pretty well. I, uh, I don't tend to worry or frazzle on things very much. It tends to be if there is something that gets under my skin a little bit, it can be sort of like it tends to be things that you can work out in the morning fairly easily, organizational challenges or anything like that. But it's always something that a few conversations you can solve it.
What's the dream you're chasing?
Um, I've shared a fair bit about work already and where we want to go with that, so won't focus on that. But my mom passed away recently, and my wife Ro and I got to talking a lot around that time about living with more intention to sort of maximize the potential of the time that you've got, and not just going with the flow, but actually deprioritizing some things that you might sort of be enjoying over others, so that you can experience as much as you can in the time that we have. And I think maybe focusing on things like global travel, focuses on things like that. I mentioned travel a few times here. And I think how we live our lives here in New York and just generally as part of that. I could probably be a little smarter when it comes to health as I get older. And I think, taking some changes to change that, taking some steps to change that a little bit, I think. It's not exactly a dream, but it's more like an intention.
Great. Final stretch, number 18, what inspires you?
I really get inspired by working with people from multiple generations with different points of view, different perspectives. The more voices you can get in the room with different informed but diverse points of view, the better it gets. And I always learn something from that kind of thing. And that's not just in design. It's I'm doing a music project right now with a friend of mine who's 84, and he's a songwriter. And it's amazing. He's basically opened up his whole songbook, and we're finding ways of producing it, and he's so open to new ways of making music that he's never seen before, because he's never used a click track, for example, or MIDI or whatever. And I've learned a ton from that. I've learned a ton from people on my team. We talked earlier about teaching. I mean, the reason that was inspiring was because of learning from the students. It's not just a one-way street with how you learn there. And I think that's the big inspiration for me, is that kind of interaction with people. And more pragmatically, I'm really inspired by living in this city. I love the experience of being in a big city generally, but I love this place, and I'm constantly inspired right now by where I live.
Number 19, any advice you'd like to share?
I am going to steal this from somebody who I know in Vancouver. His name's Scott Hawthorne. And he did a Pachacucha about 10 years ago, or Pachacucha, or however you pronounce that, excuse me. And his speech was all about the value of being open to chance meetings, to meeting people that you wouldn't have met otherwise, or you wouldn't have connected with, and how that has informed his life. And I that really resonated with me when I saw that. And he actually took a big bag of tennis balls and knocked them out into the audience and said, "Anybody with a tennis ball is welcome to come to my place for dinner." And then I think he asked everybody to hand it to the person behind them so he didn't wind up with a whole bunch of type A people who would jump up and grab the ball. I love that. And I took a lot away from that. And that's how I've met a lot of the people here in New York when we first got here. My wife, Ro, especially, has been very conscious about putting ourselves in situations where we will just have, sort of random meeting with people. And some of these people now have become our best friends. And so that would be the advice that I'd share, probably, is to keep yourself open to that kind of connection with people.
That really resonates with me. We had John Maeda on recently, and that unlikely 15 minutes really changed my life, I think.
No, fantastic. I've got to listen to that one. Actually, I haven't listened to that one yet. Is it out?
It is out. Yeah, it's up.
Okay, I'll check that out.
And finally, number 20, how can our listeners keep tabs on you? How can we follow you?
I don't have an enormous social media presence. I focus mostly on just sort of our internal work here and sort of building sort of direct relationships with clients and things like that. So, but I do a fair amount of public speaking. I was actually just in Vancouver about 2 weeks ago, speaking at a conference there. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn and things like that. I think that's actually how we got back in touch, wasn't it? It's LinkedIn.
It's possible.
And you can always get me at CRTKL as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Paul. I know you from my art school days, and hearing about your New York story and your travels is, of course, very dreamlike, but equally kind of important for me is hearing about the facilitation work that you do, particularly in the practice space. I think that's a super interesting piece to share. Thanks so much.
I appreciate that. I mean, I'm one of those people that's gone from the model of design where it was we never did a group project when I was in school. It never happened. And when you graduate, you were expected to sort of come up with be the lone genius and come up with it yourself. Why don't you have the vision? And the moment that I started getting into the industry a little bit further, I realized the design is really changing, and it's something that you really work on. The more collaborative it is, the more diverse the group that you get around the table, and the more focused they are on a really clear problem, the better it gets. And it just keeps getting better.
Totally agree. Thank you so much, Paul.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been great. It's been great catching up with you, Thomas. All the best to you.
Thanks.